Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the 2019-2020 series of the RLI Power Hour webinar series. Tonight's topic is on challenging physician issues. My name is Jennifer Pendo, and I'm a program manager with Radiology Leadership Institute. Before we get started, I'd like to review a few logistical items so you know how to participate in today's event. Could you please advance the slide? Thank you. Here's an example of the Gotowebinar control panel. You should see something that looks like this in the upper right corner of your own computer desktop. When you join tonight's webinar, you selected to join either by phone call or computer audio. And if you join by phone call, please be sure to enter your audio PIN number, which is found in the audio pane section of your control panel. And if for any reason you'd like to change your selection, you can do so by accessing your audio pane section. There will be some interactivity at the beginning as well as a Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. You'll have the option to submit your questions via text or by typing them, not by text, but by typing them into the questions pane in the control panel, or you may raise your hand and the moderator will call on you and unmute you so you can ask your questions verbally. And without further ado, please advance the slide. I'd like to go ahead and introduce the program organizer of the RLI Power Hour webinar series, Dr. Jen Nason, who is our moderator for tonight, as well as Dr. Matt Hawkins. Unfortunately, Dr. Hawkins had a conflict, so he's not on the call, but Dr. Nason will be leading the charge, and I'd like to turn it over to her to introduce tonight's faculty.
Thank you, Jen. So I am very pleased to be introducing our two speakers this evening, kicking off this year's RLI Power Hour programming. So tonight, as Jen had mentioned, we have Drs. Canon and Heilbrun discussing challenging physician issues, a topic I think that we have all likely dealt with in some capacity throughout our careers. And I think we're going to get some really great insight on how to better manage these complex situations. So I'd like to introduce our speakers. So we have Dr. Cheri Canon. She is a professor and Wynton Stanley Endowed Chair of Radiology at the University of Alabama School of Medicine. Sits on the University of Alabama Joint Operating Leadership Council. She's been very active with the ABR, serving for 11 years as an examiner, and also sits on its Board of Governors. She has been Vice Chair of the ACR and the Board of Chancellors. Also served on the Board of Chancellors as Chair of the ACR Commission on Education. She is President-elect of the Society of Chairs of Academic Radiology Departments, SCARD, and co-creator of LEAD, a new women's leadership development program jointly developed by SCARD and GE Healthcare. She is active in the Birmingham community and is a member of the Birmingham Rotary Club and is the current president for Momentum, a Birmingham women's leadership organization. Our additional speaker here that we have is Dr. Heilbrun. She is Vice Chair of Quality and an Associate Professor in the Department of Radiology and Imaging Sciences at Emory University. She maintains adjunct appointments at the University of Utah in Biomedical Informatics and the Department of Surgery and the Urology Division. She is a member of the ACR Appropriateness Criteria Urologic Panel and the DSI Non-Interpretive Panel. She serves on the RSNA Radiology Informatics Committee as the chair of the Structure Reporting Subcommittee. Her research and career activities foster working environments that improve patient care through workplace and workflow design using data, evidence, and shared decision-making to drive decisions. Clinically, she is an abdominal imager with a focus on imaging the GU tract and pelvis with both CT and MRI. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Canon.
Great, thank you and welcome. So we've been given this fairly straightforward topic of challenging physician issues. It in and of itself is fairly challenging, and I hope that although this is a webinar that many of you will be willing to participate, because this is going to be really more of a case study format and presenting specific scenarios and really encourage you to participate and provide your opinions and your thoughts, because that will make this significantly more interactive. So here's just a statement perhaps to kick us off. Bill Owens, former US Representative of New York, said, "True leadership lies in guiding others to success, ensuring that everyone is performing at their best, doing the work they are all pledged to do, and doing it well." So how do radiologists tackle tough physician issues that can come up? So let's briefly talk about our learning objectives. So hopefully after this webinar, you will be able to describe the role of emotional intelligence in developing successful teams, understand the impact of burnout on our behavior, leverage internal and intrinsic motivations to derive this desired behavior, and finally, be able to create opportunities that foster the success of individuals and teams. So those are our objectives. And so let's go ahead and head into our first scenario. So imagine that you're chair of a large academic practice. Two of your senior faculty members in different sections have independently come to you with very similar requests. One feels she no longer needs to take call as she is a senior faculty member who has taken call for 30 years. The other no longer wants to do biopsies because he finds procedures disruptive to his workflow. So, what do you do? We'd love to hear from you. It's going to be a long evening if you don't participate.
Okay, we have, looks like one question here. Trying to mute. Oh. My audio, I'm unable to unmute for some reason. Dr. Weissman had a question. Some issue.
Well,
Pat, can you do that from your end?
Dr. Weissman had a question.
All right, Ian, we're trying to get to you.
Right. We definitely want to hear what you have to say.
Well, I'm going to start charging down this pathway with some questions, and then hopefully others will be willing to join in and we can unmute Ian. So I think first of all, you have to stop and ask the question in each case is why. What is really driving these individuals to come to you with these requests? And then as a leader, you need to also identify, particularly in an academic situation, the role of your other leaders, your section chiefs, your division directors, and often as a leader, particularly a chair or practice leader, our tendency is to jump in and solve a problem. And sometimes we do that too quickly without taking a breath and thinking about it. And so you need to really take a pause and think about the why and how to engage your other leaders. Have we been able to unmute Ian yet? And do we have any
It
other?
actually looks, sorry, it actually looks like he might be self-muted.
Okay.
Ian, are you able to unmute by clicking on the icon on your side?
Yeah, whenever I try to unmute him, it doesn't do anything for some reason.
Okay, well, Dr. Nathan, would you like to just read some of the questions that are coming in then through the question pane?
Sure.
It's a soft unmute as well, so they need to click it on their end once you've unmuted them, if it's gray.
Okay.
There you go. Oh.
Okay. Huh.
Well, if we want to just read what comments people have been placing, we can do that.
Sure. So I do see a few questions here. Dr. Liu is asking, look at workflow. Can it be improved? Is there something behind the request to not do procedures?
Okay, I think those are great comments, and I think that's exactly what we have to do. Sometimes reflexively in these situations, we may want to immediately say, no, we can't accommodate either things, but as you think about it, okay, why are you asking this? If we can make the workflow better to improve your day, then maybe you'll be more willing to participate. So I think that that's a great comment, is make efficiency as best as possible, but also understanding what's really the motive behind what they're doing, and it may require more conversation. What's really driving this? Other thoughts or comments out there?
I do have an additional question here. So this is from Dr. Srini. Their comments are, I would have a discussion with other leadership within the department. It might be a win-win if other members of the division are willing to take call for additional compensation.
I think that's a great comment. And in fact, that is something that we have actually employed here, where in some situations, not all situations, you may have other members who are interested in taking that call, particularly if it's in a situation where there's a financial incentive. And in fact, we actually provide an opportunity to do that and found that to be very beneficial. I would say the one pitfall for us has been you have to be very transparent about this and make it as a voluntary effort, because you don't ever want the situation where the more junior faculty members feel like they're being forced to do this, even though there's a financial incentive. So I think that's a great suggestion. Maybe one other.
I'd like to speak up also. I think one of the things to look at as a leader when you are exploring these options is also, again, thinking about some of the motivations and the opportunities. So it's often, you know, the older faculty, we want their experience and we want to maintain their role in the department and the mentoring and the access and the network that they bring to the department. And so how you can take advantage of that and support them, and also make it that the junior faculty who are perhaps more willing to take the weekend call are not missing out on those opportunities because they are on call. So these are some of the things also to look at the depth of what the challenge is around equity and the opportunities that you are both fostering and perhaps risking closing some doors to.
Those are great points. I think as you approach problems like this, with experience, you develop a construct, because each problem is unique, but they often fall in a similar pattern. In this case, to Marta's point, you don't want to go to the extremes. You don't want to say no outright to them because maybe there's an opportunity, but you also don't want to go sure, you don't have to take call anymore. Clearly that's a problem. So I think it's somewhere in between that we have to be creative. Now let me ask this. So what about in the next scenario if, let's see if I can get, same story, but instead of an academic practice, you're a practice president in a medium-sized radiology subspecialty practice. Does that change the response in any way, or is it really the same construct? I'd love to hear an opinion on that.
So Dr. Patel chimed in and said same concept.
I think that's true. And what's interesting, it's same concept, but a very different culture. So academic practices are historically a matrix organization within the leadership team. Even further back historically with academic practices, some people would refer to them as benevolent dictatorships. You had a chair that was hopefully benevolent who made most of the decisions. Community private practices are very different. For the most part, they're very democratic. And so although there may be a practice president, there is significant more democracy. So sometimes some of the more creative in-between ideas don't fly as well in that culture. Now, it isn't necessarily a no, but people, I think there's more resistance to creating alternative models of workflow in community practices. And it's very much has to do with the local culture. But I think the point here is you really have to recognize the culture that you are working in and understand that as you consider the why behind some of these requests. So any more comments about this scenario before we move on? I think it's a very common issue that comes up anytime that we're talking about time or money. That's absolutely a recurring theme as we see in practices, both academic and community practices. All right, with that, we'll move on to our next one. Also an incredibly common scenario. Again, you're chair of a large academic practice. One of your strong leaders is disengaging, not providing input at leadership meetings, and sometimes having comments that are very pessimistic or even filled with biting sarcasm. He is now missing key meetings, coming in late, and even having some disruptive conversations. So how do you handle that?
Yep, waiting on some comments or questions in the question pane. I think we're still having issues with the hand raising.
Okay.
Okay, so we do have a comment. Sounds like time for a coffee chat.
That's
Yes.
a great answer. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with that concept, there's a construct of dealing with disruptive physicians that actually originally came out of Vanderbilt. And it's a rapidly escalating approach to the disruptive physician. And it's done in a private manner, but typically the first offense would be this very casual coffee cup or water cooler chat, usually couched with, I know you don't mean to behave this way, and this is not typical for you. I was just wondering what's going on in your life to make you say the comments that you've said. That's kind of the first pass. One of the nice things about this coffee cup approach is it escalates quickly, so that once you see this behavior over and over, it escalates to the more personal meetings, typically in the chair office. I think it's an incredibly effective construct to use, and happy if anyone wants to contact me to send more information about it. It's very effective. Other comments about what's going on here?
So I have one from Dr. Patel. Have a private conversation with him to figure out what's going on.
I think private is key here. This is something that during the meetings, you want to try to redirect as much as possible. But absolutely, all things with disruptive behavior need to be handled in a private manner. Again, it gets back to our question of why. Why is this person behaving the way they are? What is going on? And sometimes even they're unaware in cases. So I would like to ask some of you, what could be occurring in this person so that, again, this is a person who had been an effective leader and then now they're not. Why are they no longer participating in ways that they had in the past?
So I think this is one of those places where, again, some of those questions of why, what's going on. So we need to, in that coffee cup conversation, you may open some of the things, but find out, is there someone else that has been coming in locally that is creating some of this challenge, or that there's a perception that this leader has that you have moved on with someone else, or that they have moved on. So there's a number of very important questions to dig into what it is. And the other question, that may be something that's outside of work that's creating a stressor. And you never know, these might be some of the same people who are trying to adjust their call structures or something else that's going on. So there's a lot of things that it could be either within the workplace or outside of the work pressure that's causing this to happen.
Yeah, and I think that's important for us to remember. You have to remember life happens outside of work. And I would say the majority of times that I have seen this occur, it's actually because of factors outside of work. And as leaders, we can't be afraid to ask about life outside of work. I know some people put up a firewall between work and home, but it's not realistic. And as leaders, it's your responsibility to inquire. It's also your responsibility to create a safe environment so people feel comfortable doing that. And then I guess my final point to remember, one of the things we're seeing more and more is burnout. And that's one of the most common reasons I see some leaders that were once effective no longer effective. And you have to remember, one of the components of burnout is you're disengaged. And in many cases, you don't realize how disruptive you've become. And so that's a key as well. So we have to remember that as we work with our colleagues. Any other final comments before we move on?
We do have a few comments on some of this discussion saying that maybe they're related to, let's see, Dr. Weissman says maybe a serious personal problem. Dr. Patel says personal or family issue, burnout. Dr. Matansky says perception of unfairness in the department.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a great point. And particularly as you work with your faculty and your partners and you set up these alternative models, you have to be very transparent about that, and you need to strive for equity. You're not always going to have equality in some of the processes, but you need to have equity and understand those differences. And Dr. Heilbrun had mentioned, you know, some of our more advanced radiologists have great wisdom to offer, and that may be in return for other things that the more junior faculty provide as well. So it's not always going to be equal, but there has to be equity and transparency. All right, good. Well, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Heilbrun.
Thank you very much. So part of what I'm going to talk about are some of these places where we have interactions between staff and physicians as another source of stress and disruption. So the first story is, you're shepherding in a new way of doing work. To get it launched, your team has delivered extensive training, many follow-up hours of coaching to site directors, modality supervisors, and managers who are charged with implementation of this daily work. In some places it's going okay, and other places, in one particular, a designated leader tells you that his team only does the work when the trainers come by to check on them. So again, the question here is, what do you do? What is this saying?
Waiting on some questions and comments.
So if there are any comments? Okay. Well, one piece to talk about is how are we framing the language when we approach this problem? We started this as insubordinate staff. I think another person would look at this and like, oh, this is someone who is being passive aggressive. And yet the other way to look at it is, are we looking at a situation where there's overburden, where we have asked this team to take on yet another large activity to reframe what they're doing, perhaps do it some different way, but we haven't taken anything off of their plate. And I think that's one of the really important questions as we keep adding, and sources of burnout are often the activity that we add more and more and more onto our leaders, ask them to do more, ask them to take on more, and we don't necessarily look at what else they're doing. And we don't necessarily we have to talk to this leader and find out, why do they not find it valuable? What are some of the options that might exist to make this seem worth the time that they have already taken to go and undergo training? Any other thoughts about how we might engage this team when we have this sense of disengagement or even passive aggressive behavior?
We do have a few comments here. So Dr. Patel says, have a focused meeting with the team to see how they are liking the new workflow and get their input.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Weissman says, foster a team of culture. Dr. Patel says, engage with the team as to the importance of the endeavor and the vital role that each person on the team plays, and what might be the benefit of the endeavor to them.
Right. And so I think that right there is one of the really important feedbacks as a leader. When somebody's not taking on this new activity, it would suggest that you have not yet convinced them of why this new activity is going to make their work better or their opportunities better or what the goal is. And so one of the concepts in lean thinking is an idea of creating flow. So this activity, this project that we're working on, is supposed to do something to improve the work. But if the team only feels like it is one more task, that's not doing it. So we may have to introduce other projects or other opportunities for the team to work that creates those aha moments where they start to engage. But you're going to have to be persistent, those conversations with the team, and to understand why they don't think it's value added, why they think it's overburdened, and why they haven't appreciated the coaching is an opportunity really more for almost as much for self-reflection as to the goals and how you're delivering the training as an observation or critique of the team that is undertaking this activity.
So Marta, I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
So in this situation, as presumably the chair or the project leader, with engaging with the team, when finding out the whys behind their behavior, do you challenge the designated leader to do that in their capacity, or do you jump in and take over?
Right. So that's a very good question. So again, what you want is for the leader to be able to become the champion of this activity. You don't want, right now, part of the issue is that it probably feels like it is getting pushed down from above, and the leader's being asked to do this and hasn't understood it. So there's a couple of different strategies. You might actually work with another leader within the department who has influence and see if they can share the experience of why it's working for them when it's not working for this group. You may see if there are any of the staff below this leader who also have some of the sense of where the opportunity is and ask them to ask questions. But the goal really is to get the leaders to become the champions of these activities. And you may have to invest and do that why time, because they really are going to be the ones that are going to carry it forward. If it always is a mandate from above, it's probably doomed to fail.
Yeah.
And again, as leaders, we also have the ability to look at in what way is this new activity taking things off of their plates that might be helpful. Any other comments from the team before I move on to another case?
We do have a few comments. So Dr. Weissman says include them at onset of planning so they have buy-in.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Jendel, make them part of the project, discuss with them what your reason was and get their input as well to see what can be modified.
Right.
Celebrate and appreciate their achievements and goals in small steps. Don't wait for the ideal end. Lead by encouraging who do the work, not penalizing who don't. That's from Dr. Sadagri.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think these are all great points and really the right thing, because it's important for us to recognize as leaders and as people that have been involved with the beginning that we may recognize see the long-term goal, but often there are very small things. So even if this team is only doing this work when the trainers come by to check on them, the fact that that's been volunteered suggests that there is a open discussion and opportunity to keep working on the discussion as the why, instead of the designated leader not telling you this and just doing it. So you've actually got an opening to discuss the challenges that are going on. And I really think all of these points that have been made are right on target. We often are asking our teams to do new things, and that can be very challenging. And the way things have been done for a reason. And we have to also spend time understanding that when we ask for new activities. So let me go on to another case. So this is a safety concern. And I think often this may come to a number of different leaders. You could be the department chair, and you receive a call from a technologist supervisor that one of the radiologists was not available when needed. This is not the first time you've received a call like this. So what are you going to do next? What are the questions that you start to ask? What are the steps that you're going to take to understand what this concern is?
Oh, we have a comment here. So no, that's from the prior one. Any questions or comments about this scenario? So Dr. Weissman says, coffee chat and get feedback.
Right. So again, this is another one of those times that as a leader, part of your job is to spend some time listening. And the question that I have for the team is, who do you need to listen to?
Mm.
We need to take time to listen to the radiologist, find out what the perspective is. We also need to take time to listen to the technologist and hear what's going on. Is this, again, another place where our perceptions are aligned about what an expectation is? We understand, our team understands what the pressures are on other aspects of the team. And again, look at some of the sources that might be contributing to this. I have another question to put out there to you. Something like this, what does it mean if the department chair is being called? Right? Does your organization have, is this the right hierarchy? And what kind of input is this giving to you about the relationships between leaders in the department?
So Dr. Weissman has a comment. He says breakdown in hierarchy.
Right. I would suggest that on this call, one question to ask both yourself as a leader and of the team is, why were you called and not the section chief or the division chief? Or was the section chief and the division chief called, and was there a sense that that response was not what you expected or what was desired? And so these are some of the things to really look at. And again, one of the goals that we have in creating a fair and just culture is that we want to keep this avenue of conversation open, but we really need to dig into whether or not this call to the department chair is the right hierarchy, or we've created a system where people feel like they can talk to each other about concerns.
Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, that's a really tough balance. When I made a lot of missteps early on in my career, I found, it's hard not to say, and you're calling me why? And which is not what you want to do, but that's the reflexive. So it can be very challenging to extract that information of challenging them to why they're calling you. So you've got to be very sensitive to that.
I agree, and I think that's one of the things that you can do as a leader. I'm trying to figure out how to get my camera and not be sunned out here. How, as a leader, to receive the information and then again work with the entire team on those cup of coffee conversations to make sure that you're starting to respect. They felt that they had to call me. I accept that responsibility. I still want the conversation to happen at a different level where this should be solved and this should be addressed. But my job is still to accept the information and then work with disseminating and listening to the right group of people.
Dr. Patel has a comment. Knowing the expectations of each member of the team is important.
I agree. Often these kinds of situations come about because, again, we don't know what we don't know. In this situation, it may be that the radiologist is almost always scheduled to be in two places at once. And that may be a problem in the system. It may not be an issue related to this. It may be that the supervisor is running understaffed. And so because they're understaffed, they're trying to make things happen in a very tight function because they're going to lose people or they're going to lose access to people. And so they need everyone right at the minute they're perfectly available. So again, this is some of the things when you delve into it, you may find that many of these situations are related to an issue of overburden in the area again, and this can be a source of stress that creates the safety concerns. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Canon, who will sort of step back, and we've already had a chance to really talk about a lot of our leadership approaches, and the comments have come through have really emphasized some of the things that I think we're going to talk about in the second half of the presentation.
Thank you. So it's important on these, although we talk about specific scenarios and oftentimes themes will recur in these, the reality is you can't plan for every unexpected mishap in either the department or a practice. So you really have to have a construct, a leadership approach. And I want to talk a little bit about what I do personally. And some of this seems maybe silly, but it can help. First of all, you don't want to overreact. And sometimes it's hard not to. You really have to do the take a pause and take a breath. And as silly as that sounds, I think that's very important. And then you really need to exercise emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence has received a lot of attention in the last probably decade. I think, though, people don't fully understand how it can be used as a construct. It's not just about being nice. Empathy is one component of it, but it's only one of several components. And in fact, I've listed for you here this reference, which I think is great. It's a quick read from Harvard Business Review, and it actually specifically breaks down emotional intelligence into 12 different domains. And again, empathy is one of those, and perhaps the most important, but others are included, such as self-awareness and importantly, optimism. So I encourage you to look at that. But one thing that we've learned, actually, emotional intelligence can be learned. And actually is increased with exercise. And so as you are confronted with problems such as these, and particularly if you sense yourself getting agitated, go through an exercise. You receive the call, the radiologist isn't there to respond to the technologist, and assume a different perspective. And Dr. Heilbrun kind of alluded to this. You know, what if something happened? What if they were with another patient and that patient was having to be resuscitated? You know, force yourself to go through that exercise to give you that perspective. Now, it doesn't mean you shouldn't act appropriately if you find other issues at hand. It doesn't mean that you're just nice, but it means you've taken a pause to consider perspective, because when you listen to people, you'll hear very different stories each time about what actually occurred, and you as the leader will have to adjudicate those stories, and that can be really challenging. So you want to dive into others' perspectives and really consider those perspectives. It doesn't mean you have to agree with how they behaved, but at least you will understand better the why behind it. And again, as you consider solutions for different problems, equity is important, not necessarily equality all the times, but equity, and that there's transparency so that that equity is understood and believed by all. That is key. You also want to be creative in your solutions. Don't automatically say no to the request, but you can't always say yes. You have to be fair to everyone, and I think that creativity is important, and someone had mentioned it earlier, that sometimes it's a win-win for the broader situation, for more people. Although one person is requesting a situation, perhaps you can implement a solution that others will benefit from, so then it becomes a real win for multiple different people. So that's kind of my basic leadership approach. It's very simple, but if you develop a construct over and over, again, it's an exercise, so it will become more reflexive than losing your temper and having your blood pressure go up. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Heilbrun to share her approach.
Okay. So one of the things that I think is really important is to understand what motivations are. And I think this book by Daniel Pink is a really important book for people in leadership positions because it really breaks down what is it, I mean, when people are misbehaving, they're misbehaving when our expectation is that they should be performing better. They should be performing at a higher level. But we need to understand what it is that will make them perform at that higher level and create opportunity for that. And so if we start with the first step of this, autonomy, which is the desire to be self-directed. And this is, I think, very important in the medical system. I think if you were to characterize most physicians, one of the drives of taking all of those tests, spending all of that time in school, memorizing all of those things, taking the step exams, is that at the end, you were going to be able to be self-directed. You were going to be able to take care of patients. And one of the realities of medicine as it's practiced is that while we all have some component of autonomy, we're also working within very complex systems that have very set rules. And how we understand physician behavior related to self-direction and autonomy and tap into that is often one of those places where a loss of autonomy is, or a fear of a loss of autonomy, is driving some of the challenges and the reasons why people are acting out. So again, if we remember that we want to, as leaders, when Dr. Canon talked about be creative, right? If you and Dr. Weissman brought up the idea that we engage the teams and we talk to people to find out what it is that they're interested in, what they want to do, how they want to do it, then we may be able to overcome some of these challenging behaviors. But we have to take the time to listen to what are the drives, what is the self-direction that the team is trying to accomplish. And then the second step is mastery, the urge to get better. I think this is true for people in academic medicine and in private practice, that we're always trying to learn new approaches, and we need to create a space where we are challenging each other to continue to get better every day, to know that there are, I think it's one of the things about being in academic medicine and working with trainees is that, even well into the field, they ask questions that I may or may not know the answer to, and the desire to get better and be able to answer that question the next time is part of what drives me to continue to work hard. So how we create that situation that it is safe and it's encouraged, and we allow all people to continue to think about how they get better, and getting better may be different for different people on your team. So these are some of the things that we want to really focus on and really take time to work through in the motivation and to get past the burnout. Is one of the issues going on is that we haven't created the space for people to actually start to get better. Are they too tired to work on getting better? And that may be a dismotivator and an incentive for poor behavior. And then finally, the last one is purpose, service to a transcendent objective. So this is one of the places where I think as leaders and as teams, we want to be able to make it clear what is the vision, what is the mission, and are people allowed to get better and to be self-directed on achieving that transcendent objective. For physicians, it's usually about creating a healthier environment, taking care of our patients, taking care of our trainees, being able to create the practice of the future. There's some kind of transcendent objective that in medicine may be easier than in other areas to tap into, but if our faculty and our staff feel that their objective, that they aren't serving this desire to create a healthier environment or reach their true north in patient care, then that may also be a dismotivator. If they feel that their job is just to check a bunch of boxes, which is certainly one of the things that we hear about in relation to burnout, is that all I do is show up and I do my work and I leave, and I'm not anymore feeling like I'm really making a difference for patients. So these motivations, understanding these three factors, and really asking when you are confronted as a leader with challenging situations, asking, have you created a space, and is your space conducive to the people within your department or your area or your practice, tapping into the autonomy, but autonomy that can be directed towards the transcendent objective created in your space. And again, that desire always to get better. So with that, I think we would like to open it up again to more conversation and more questions.
We're going to try the hand raising thing one more time. So if anyone has a question, raise your hand and I'm going to try to click on you to unmute you. Well, I guess what you guys are thinking, I actually have a question. So this question is for both you, Drs. Canon and Heilbrun. What have you found to be the most effective strategies in building a team and bringing people together?
Want to start first, Dr. Canon?
That was a punt. All right. So I think probably the most important thing is selection of the individuals on that team and diversity of those individuals and the broad definition of diversity. So not just gender, ethnicity, but also diversity of thought, diversity of experience, training, generation, abilities. I think that's key. And as a leader, you need to specifically surround yourself with people who have very different opinions. Because you sit in an echo chamber and you're not going to solve problems in the most effective way. You really need to challenge yourself to listen to others' perspectives and so purposefully organize the team in that way. I think that's key, and then create a very safe environment so they, one, realize that they can disagree with you, and two, challenge them, prove to them that failure is okay and that you're accepting a failure, and even challenge them, if you don't have a few big fails on occasion, you're probably not trying hard enough. So, and fail yourself and fail publicly and own it publicly. And so that, I think, creates that safe environment for this diverse group of people to really kind of challenge the more difficult problems that we run into.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've been working on more recently on creating those teams is also being very deliberate about creating space for the teams to work and actually carving out and being deliberate of, we're going to have you engage in this activity. It's going to take time, and we're going to support from the leadership above the team that it's okay to call in PRNs. It's okay to do some of the other things to support this team being able to take the time out and start solving the problems and work on the problems, that you can't do everything at the same time as when you're trying to take care of patients. So that's been one of the solutions. And again, that has to be a buy-in from the entire organization, that we're willing to create the space for teams to form and for teams to fail and for teams to try different things and be supportive. And I think that's been also one of the big lessons is the team building. The positive team building happens in creating safe spaces, but it's a big ask to create those safe spaces when we're already working in a fairly stressed environment.
Any questions or comments from the group? You can either raise your hand, or if you want to just type it in the question pane, then we can do that too. You guys were so thorough.
Well, that, and it's the end of a long day for a lot of people.
And talking about difficult people is a difficult conversation.
I mean, I guess I have, well, here's a question here, actually. We have a couple coming in through the question pane. So comment from Dr. Garver, the 5 dysfunctions of a team model is really helpful.
Yeah, great.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a question from Dr. Shankar. Do you have a few specific examples? Are I'm not sure if they're referring to the team building, but
yeah. So one of the things that we have done recently, so again, I mean, I'm describing stories that, you know, I've been involved in, and this trying to make new ways of doing work is very much about a cultural transformation. So it's not unexpected that people would be resistant to these new ways of doing work. So even with the training, I think it's, you know, understanding that it's not there. So one of the things that we have done that has been very successful is we've taken some of the things that people do all the time, inventory management, and reorder is an example of waste that people are very frustrated with. I think anywhere you go, you can say, oh, do you run out of supplies? Do you, can you find things in your storerooms? And we started taking it, you know, breaking it down into organizing closets. And it's a big lift, but it feels very real to be able to walk, you know, to have the experience of a space that everybody has to have insider knowledge to navigate, to a space that you no longer have to have insider knowledge, that it's neat, that it's organized, that you take pride in. So that's been one of the things that we've done on building teams, is we've actually kept digging down to what's an activity that feels like it's in the scope of responsibility that you could have mastery about, that you could have autonomy for, and that would actually just make your life feel more organized. So that's been one of the things that we've done, is, you know, really start, you know, asking people, what is it about your job that is so annoying, that is just driving you crazy? And let's see if we can make a small team and change that.
well, I do have a few questions here. So Dr. Belande is asking, any advice on how to handle a physician going through a rough patch, such as disease or divorce?
Yeah, that's challenging, but I'll tell you, it's so common, and I think it's important as a leader, and again, this is in some respects probably easier in the academic environment. As a chair, I can make more unilateral decisions, and I think it's important that it's back to the space comment from Dr. Heilbrun. You need to give them space to heal, to recover, and you need to give them permission to do this. And sometimes you have to really almost force that. Most physicians are very high functioning. They don't want to take time off because they don't want to be a burden to their colleagues. And so you really need to have that conversation with them about, it's okay. In fact, not only is it okay, it's the best for the patient and for your family and for you to recover. And so you need to, as much as you can, allow that to happen. And you need to be very upfront with talking about leave and what that means. Have the conversation up front about financial impact, if there's any. And sometimes we tend to nickel and dime this. I would argue that being generous up front with leave pays off dividends in the back end, and so we need to do that. But most of all, as a leader, you just need to listen, and you need to provide them the runway to navigate what they're moving through.
Okay, I have a question from Dr. Moriarty. How do you approach a situation with a difficult supervisor or chair? An example may be you're recently promoted to a new role and it becomes clear that you were specifically put in that position to deliver bad news or unpopular program changes across the department.
So it's, again, part of this is, you know, how you address the narrative. And Dr. Canon brought up the idea of being optimistic. So if you've been brought in to make changes, how is that your agency, and how is that an opportunity for the department, and how do you frame that conversation about the opportunity without it being, because again, if the goal is changes, it's a very tight rope to walk between saying, well, it needs to be changed because everything was bad, or it needs to be changed because this already has the environment that has the capability to do more.
Framing is so important for your perspective and for the people with whom you're working, their perspective. It's key.
Hey, we have a question from Dr. Weissman. How do you foster team building with a quote unquote benevolent dictator as a leader?
Well, you just hope they're really benevolent. Yeah, no, that's a tough one. You know, one thing is some of the dictatorial behaviors may be occurring either out of habit, lack of recognition of them, or the fear that team members are going to fail. So if you can think about each of those reasons behind it and address those, the latter being if you can prove yourself and really have candid conversations with this leader, you may be able to earn their trust and confidence. Now, earn is the key word, and that may take some time. You may be able to have a sincere enough situation that you can have that difficult, crucial conversation with that leader, and try that. Now, there are also times that just may not work. The construct is there of the benevolent dictator, and other things are not going to happen, and you need to know as a person for your own sanity when to try an alternative measure or just move on, to be quite frank. So and I say that like all of those are very simple. None of those is particularly simple.
I would agree entirely. I think that's going to be one of the most difficult things, is to take the time personally to look at, again, if you are in a conflict or you're being asked to navigate a conflict, is take that breathe time and look at what the alternatives are. Can you reframe it? If you can't reframe it, what are some of the other options and what would make it a better situation? Not to get, always the grass is greener somewhere else, because those are big moves. But you need to take time, and we all need to be willing to, to understand is, where does the change need to happen, and what agency do I have in making the change that needs to happen?
So we have a question from Dr. Lopez. I'm going to try to unmute him. Let's see. So, I think you're on, Dr. Lopez.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes.
Finally, another voice.
Yeah, here we go. I was just wondering about the physician who's clearly lost it, doesn't want to leave the practice, and won't retire. The older physician who needs to continue work for financial reasons or through a divorce or any number of reasons, but is clearly well past his prime.
So let me challenge you a little bit. What do you mean by well past their prime? I mean, how are you defining that?
I'm defining it that they haven't been to a meeting in a long time. Any CME they do is made up. Texts are calling you and saying, this guy really is just phoning it in and he has no interest at all.
Well, so I ask for clarification because one, we need to be careful of some of our biases, and in many cases, our experienced radiologists are fabulous. Now, if it becomes an issue of patient care, clearly that's a different road to travel down, and most practices have hopefully mechanisms in place for ongoing physician evaluation, and that if there are patient care issues, this is triggered, and you go down that road, and you bravely go down that road and don't ignore it. I think that's sometimes the biggest problem is you don't want to go down that road because you're questioning someone's ability to practice, and particularly if they're in a financial situation that they need to practice. To be quite honest, again, if patient care is at risk, you have to go down that road regardless. Now, there are the gray areas in between, disengaging, not participating in meetings, that kind of thing. That's more challenging, and that's when you need to have those conversations. And part of those conversations, explaining you're recognizing this behavior, clearly delineating expectations. Then if they don't change, then a quick follow-up and more forceful, then a follow-up that includes a written description of, we expect this from our colleagues, this is what you have not been doing, and this is what you need to do going forward, in an explanation of how you're going to address that. I say all that a little bit vaguely because each academic institution specifically has a lot of different rules and regulations, HR versus legal, so you really have to know your environment. I would say the biggest mistake that is typically made here, though, is just not engaging. So that's the one thing. You've got to engage. You've got to figure out a path forward, and you can't ignore the inevitable. And I would also say, don't not act out of fear. You know, we could be sued. Don't just you ignore that. You have to do what's right at the end of the day for your colleagues and your patients.
Right.
Great, thank you.
That's part of that service to that transcendent objective, right? We're responsible for making sure that the environment is able to work optimally, and that means dealing with difficult people and making sure that they're in the best place that they possibly can be, whether or not that is still working in the department.
Right. And we've had some great experience with people who are not ready to retire, in some cases can't retire, but they're not ready to go full bore. And so we have some interesting part-time solutions that we've put in place, and it's been incredibly effective.
Sounds good, thank you.
Well, perfect. So we're just a little bit over the hour. I don't know if we can go to the next slide and do our closing slide here.
Oops, sorry.
Well, thank you, Dr. Canon Heilbrun. Oh, that's all right. I'll just.
It looks like it went too far. Yeah. There we go.
Your brief announcement. Oh, okay, here we go. There it is. So just want to say thank you to both Drs. Heilbrun and Canon for your excellent insight on this topic. Learned a lot of great things from you guys. Just a few things before we go. Our next Power Hour webinar is Basics in Corporatization, scheduled for Thursday, October 17th, 7 p.m. Eastern Standing Time. If you wish to register for the corporatization webinar or any of our other Power Hour webinars, you must register for them individually at, here's the website here. And we'll also be sending out you a post-webinar survey. So please take some time to do the survey and give us some feedback so we can make this a great experience for you. So with that, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.